So I just want to thank Khaki Tours and particularly Kosal, Farooq, for putting this together. It has become my innate duty to need to talk about this tradition because I belong to a family of both dancers and musicians, and we do come from the community of performers, of both dancers and musicians. My family history dates back as far as records go to the mid 17th, to the mid 18th century. So in the 1800s, around 1750. My ancestors belonged to the Tanjore court under Sarabhoji Maharaja, and they were performers of both music and dance. And how we know this is by records that the British kept, because the ancestor named Papa Mar paid taxes to the British government. So there was a record of her being a part of the court of Tanjore. And yes, the dance did belong to the temples, but it also belonged to the court. And she was a part, actually, of the dowry that was given by Sarabhoji Maharaja to the Travancore dynasty when they married. And she moved on to Travancore and she performed there, and she was pivotal in a time where the art really began to change. You have to realize that the 1700s were a time where the dance repertoire, what we call today Bharatanatyam, it was that particular lineage that came out of Tanjore who was responsible for creating what we dance today on the dance proscenium stage. So the entire repertoire and how it's done, the etiquette, is actually of a tradition that's about 250 years old. So we date back that far. And by the mid 1800s, the family left Tanjore because of particularly a famine that was in Tanjore. And we moved to Chennai. And there was a real shift by the 1800s where the cultural hub was not Tanjore anymore. The cultural hub started to become Madras. Chennai was the cultural hub. And we moved here. And my ancestor Kamachi, who was the daughter, great-granddaughter of Papa Mar, she moved here and began her own life by teaching dance and teaching music. And we have to remember that also this family was the repository of the real heart of Carnatic music. In the family, there is no differentiation between music and dance, because when a dancer is trained, he or she is trained both in music and in dance. My ancestors became the repository of both Tyagaraja Swamigal compositions, Shama Shastri, and Dikshita. They had learned their music from the direct source of the composer and also of the shishyas of the composers. So there was this gargantuan repertoire that they represented, and they had brought that to Chennai. And it wasn't easy for any of them, particularly being women from this community. It's always been a challenge from one generation to the next. It's always been challenging. Kamachema had a daughter named Dhanam, Vinay Dhanam as she's called, and she is really regarded as the doyen of classical music. She was responsible for really sharing the repertoire of both dance music of composers such as Shaitanya, Swami Dikshita, Shama Shastri, and who she was she was a very, very tough woman. Today, when we talk about our family, we talk about coming from the Veena Dhanamar lineage. I can safely say that we talk about being a part of the Dhanamar tradition with a certain hesitance, because she was such a stickler for tradition and a very, very, very strict practitioner of her art. So Veena Dhanamar, at the age of 9, was recognized as a prodigy in both music and playing the veena. She was trained by Veena Kuppana, who taught her to play the veena. And she learned a large repertoire of padams and javalis from Veena Baldas. And these padams and javalis are dance pieces that are performed within the tradition, and today well beyond the tradition also. But she was responsible for bringing such pieces onto the proscenium, and for people to, particularly in Tamil Nadu, to be exposed to such really sophisticated music that she was single-handedly responsible for in creating a new aesthetic in the music field. I need to stop here for a second and just talk about the uniqueness of every single generation in the family. They have left their own indelible mark with both music and dance, and the cultural tapestry of what we call Bharatanatyam and Carnatic music. So when we get down to who Veena Dhanamar was, I'm sure she would not appreciate me talking about her, but we don't have any other option today, particularly in today's time. She was such a strong practitioner of her music, where even when she had her own progeny, when she had her own children, she gave them to actually her sister Rupavati, who was also a great vocalist, to bring her kids up, because she could not, she was highly annoyed by the sound of children crying in the house, because that would disturb the practice of her music and interfere with the shruti of the veena. So for her veena was the ultimate in her life. It was only her veena was her religion. And undeniably, she stood by that till the end of her life. She was one of the first women to perform on a proscenium stage, and she did that as a solo artist without any accompaniment, so no mridangam, nothing. And she wasn't a popular artist in that sense, but she was a musician's musician. So we lived in this part of Chennai at that time. It was the heart of Chennai, called Georgetown. And so we lived in this small little house upstairs, in a rented house. And within that space, Veena Dhanamar would have her weekly performances on Fridays, where stalwarts from both the north and the south would come and listen to her music. And that place, I've actually gone to that place. It's not a part of the family home anymore, but it's literally just a very, very stoic room that could possibly house, I could say, comfortably 10 people. But people would sit on the steps leading up to the house and sit in silence to listen to her music every single week. And when she did perform at home, even the fruit sellers who would come down selling their merchandise would actually remove their slippers at the end of the street and not make any noise to ensure that Dhanamar was not disturbed while she was playing her music. It was that type of seriousness and scholarship and performance objective that she had, that she did not care about anything personal. Everything was her art. there are quite a few anecdotes about Veena Dhanamar, and some that can be shared and some that can't be shared because they might be offensive to some people, which she did not care about at all. When she would perform, there would be no interaction with the audience. There would be complete utter silence when she was performing. She had very few students. Even teaching within the tradition, teaching within the family, Veena Dhanamar was very, very difficult. She actually charged her own grandchildren 10 rupees a class. We're talking about the early 1900s, the 20s, where 10 rupees was quite an amount of money. But to learn the family repertoire, there had to be that monetary exchange and that certain responsibility. So they learned from Veena Dhanamar by ensuring that she was paid for her teaching. Even during Veena Dhanamal's time, Bala Saraswati, who was my grandmother, was born. And she had an ardent, natural adeptness to dance and music that many people understood from her age, from a very ripe age of 3, actually. And so growing up in a household of music and dance, where actually we hadn't been performing dance for about 4 generations before Balama. It was only the music. The stigma attached to the dance by the 1800s to the early, to the turn of the century was very, very, I would say, there was a certain distaste towards the traditional practitioners of dance and music. And we're not, in today's discussion, I don't think we'll be getting into the political and social side of that. But the resonance of dance had continued within the family. And we continued performing the music, but not the dance in public. But Balama was the first generation after 4 generations to begin to start dancing on a public proscenium. And that was a great challenge. She had to go through many, many hurdles. Her entire life was encapsulated by hurdles. But when she was first put into class to learn dance, Veena Dhanamar by that time had actually lost her eyesight. And Balama's mother, who was T. Jayamari, who was a stalwart musician in her own right, went to her mother, Dhanamar, and asked, Bala wants to perform. She wants to learn dancing. She has a natural finesse about it. What do you think about it, Ma? Because she was the head of the household. She made the decision. And what Veena Dhanamar asked straightforward was, does she have straight teeth, and whether she was cross-eyed or not? And both of the answers to that were no and no. And then she asked her granddaughter to sing something, and she had the capacity to sing. And her grandmother said, yes, she can learn how to dance. And Balama's career started from there. She learned from her guru Kandappa, who belonged to the Tanjavur family of Nattunas and dance gurus, who actually also trained Papaman. So if we go back to the lineage, that family had trained Dhanamar's family up to the 1700s. So even today, the families are in touch, and it's a 250-year connection between the family. So she began learning at the tender age of 3. Her guru was extremely strict and a true perfectionist. And we're talking about people here who changed the art form in their own generation. Tradition is not about copying something that an earlier generation did. It is about renewing the art and how it is performed and how it is visualized. The aesthetic generally stays the same, but how do you push the envelope further? How do you move it forward? And that's what Kandappa, Balama's guru, really represented. Kandappa trained her up until her early 20s. Her classes involved dancing 6 hours a day, 3 hours of music a day, every single day, even on a day of performance. And he was extremely, extremely strict about it. And in those days, there was no getting involved with what the guru said or what the guru did, because he was the ultimate in, he was the final say in what happened to that student's dancing career. So Kandappa really was difficult. Every day Balama she was beaten into submission and forced to do this without respite. I believe my great-great-grandmother Jayama, Balama's mother, would have turmeric paste made every day ready when Balama would come back from class, because her legs would be bleeding from the amount of beatings that she would get from Kandappa when she learned. But she never gave up. She had quite a tumultuous, but definitely a star career in her art. She was one of the first women in the dancing field to receive both the Padma Bhushan and Padma Vibhushan. But to get to that point was a very, very tough journey for her. She had gone through many health issues from childhood. She had rheumatic fever, which damaged her heart, and she danced right through that. And Balama, what she represented was both a community and a very unique art form, where it is something that might not be easy to handle or take, because the art form is a very, very intense art form. It is not just something for entertainment, but it's also a cathartic process for the artist and the audience who is watching the performance. And that's who she was. You know, there are many reviews of her dancing. But one in particular really stands out for me, because she was in New York, she was in the US, which she began touring in the US from 1962 onwards. And we're in 1976 now, right? And she's performed in San Francisco. They've done a recording of her dancing. And they realized that she would lick her lips when she was dancing, which is very unusual for Balama. So this was watched by both my mother and Balama's primary disciple named Louise Scripps. And during that recording, they decided to take her to the doctor, because she was performing in New York City the next day at Alice Tully Hall in Lincoln Center, which is one of the prime performing arts spaces in the world, really. And by chance, they had checked her blood sugar, and her sugar levels were above 600. And the doctor said, this is impossible. This woman can't perform tomorrow, because she will collapse. It's impossible for her to really do this. And what Balama said was, no, I'm committed to my performance, so I will be doing this. And they got to New York, they had a doctor off stage. She danced with such intensity that day that her review in the New York Times the next day, written by a woman named Anna Kisagorf, had said, for those who had seen Bala Saraswati perform last night, was a great honor. But those who left the performance that day were cowards because they could not handle the great intensity of her performance. And that's what Balama represented. There was that every single performance was a challenge. Every single hurdle was a challenge. For example, in 1961, when she first went on tour to Japan. And by that time, Balama was already 43, and it would be her first international tour. And there was quite strong headwinds from Delhi about not wanting Bala Saraswati to represent India at what they call the East-West Conference, where many art forms of Korean performance, no theater, ballet, all kinds of kabuki theater were presented during that conference. And many people refused to send Balama, but Kapila Vatsyayan, who was at that time the Ministry of Culture, said, no, Bala must go, she must be represented. And she said, if Bala's performance in Tokyo is not successful, I will resign. And they went to Tokyo, Balama performed, and being completely caught off guard by the Japanese audience, who are very, very held back about applause. After she performed, she said, you know, this is completely failed. This tour has failed and I've let everyone down. And she was really heartbroken. But the next day in the newspapers, it was her performance that was on the front page and to rave reviews. And that's where her international career really went through the roof after that. She represented India as a cultural icon, ensured that both the music and the dance were established cultural beacons within the United States, that the tradition of Balama's music and dance has actually been completely assimilated within the American culture, where, yes, one of India's oldest and greatest traditions of music and dance is actually also an American tradition, because it's been there for so long, because there are so many Westerners who have learned this tradition, so many people who have given their time, money, expertise, and really invested their lives into this tradition. Particularly, you need to mention Samuel Scripps and Louise Scripps, who were integral in starting the Bala Saraswati School of Music and Dance in the United States in 1965, and which continues on even to today. Balama's daughter, my mother, Lakshmi Knight, who represented, many times she's mentioned as the link to a tradition. Without that link, there is no continuity in the tradition. She was the repository of the musical legacy and also the dance legacy. And she was my guru. You know, for me to sit here and talk about my family sometimes can be very looking through something like a glass wall, because it's history as it is for everybody else. But for me, my mother was my guru, and she was the 8th generation of this family. And what she taught me is indelible, because particularly when she was sick during towards the end of her life, there was a lot of learning for me as a dancer and as a musician. So knowing that your guru and your mother, we both had limited time with each other in learning, was a very, very hard reality for me to face. And that taught me the fact that the art is much greater than any particular sentiment or any familial connection or even my own capacity. The art is boundless, but we are given a sliver of it because this is all that we can handle. This body can only handle so much, the mind can only handle so much. So this tradition has moved on for the past 250 years. And with the Bala Saraswati School of Music and Dance that we have here in Chennai, we teach a lot of first generation performers of music and dance, children who have never been exposed to any type of classical art. Coming here, not knowing anything, but after a while having complete commitment in keeping this tradition as their own. And we have to remember that tradition just doesn't involve just a family connection, but it really involves everybody, including the Shishya Parampara and the familial Parampara, become one, because that's how traditions survive. I would like to just showcase some of the dance that my kids do. We'll be doing segments of two pieces. One is an invocation piece called Alaripu. You will see how the body moves and the unique aesthetic of Balama's tradition of dance when you see the kids dance today. So.
Amazing.
The next piece that the children will be demonstrating comes from the second item that's danced in a dance performance called Dadisaram. It is again very lively. The speed, the Kala Pramanam is quite intense. You will again see the nritta, the pure dance aspect of this style, really heavily represented within this piece. So let's take a look at it. Come. And when we talk about Abhinaya, particularly in this tradition, we what are we talking about here? We're talking about Abhinaya means using the body, facial expressions, and mudras to express what the dance is about. And it is a stylized way of expressing the dance. That's what it's about. So what I'm going to do is gimbal it. Yeah. I'll just do a few lines of the Abhinaya just to show you how it translates into the body and how communication can be very natural with it.
Great.
Yeah. So even if we take a very, very simple phrase like you come here, right? It can be a very objective way of mentioning it. If I can say you come here, or you come here. You, to plead, come here. You come here. You come here. Or even a simple phrase, translation of a line of a Varnam, for example. I am stricken with love for you at this moment. Why are you so indifferent? I love, stricken for you. Why the indifference to me? I love, stricken, body burning in passion. Love, love, love for you. Why this indifference? Indifference, 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 indifference. Why? So this is just a sample of it. Can we move on to questions, you think?
Amazing. That was simply amazing. And I think seeing your students perform and then to see, you describe, it's just an amazing feeling for everyone who's watching. It's a really special sort of time for us. So thank you very much for that. And please thank your students for us as well. We're so delighted to have seen them perform. And they were so perfect, so synchronized, and it was just delightful to see them.
It's an honor. I wish we could have done this in person. Much easier. I hate doing this online because I can't see you guys.
Yeah, we would have absolutely loved to do this in person. Hopefully, God willing, we can do that as well at Khaki Lab sometime. But I guess till then we just have to make do with this.
Sure, of course.
Of course, we have a lot of compliments for you. But before we start with that, I have a question. Could you tell us about the murals and the pictures behind you and who they are and what moment in time?
We can definitely do that. We can actually just go through an entire walkthrough with this.
Oh, that would be amazing. Please do that.
Yeah. So we can start out, if we can align this properly with our phones. So, Bala Saraswati. This photograph was taken in the year 1957. This is her brother, T. Vishwanathan, who was exceptional musician. He was at the University of Wesleyan University in the United States and professor there from the 1950s until early 2000s until he passed away. And there is history in this photograph also. This was taken at All India Radio because in those days, Balama's dance performances also happened at the radio because the musicality of her dancing would be broadcast on the radio with a select audience that she would perform to. But actually, the day after this performance, she got deathly ill for an entire year. So from the year 1957 to 1958, she did not perform because, as my mother would recall, she actually would have a fever of over 104 every day. And she, at that time, she began to sing this sloka called the Subramanya Bhujanga. She sang this sloka every day, and she composed it in 78 ragas that she performed only for herself, and she felt that she got better after that, after she began singing. Here we actually have a very interesting photograph that has Vinay Dhanamal in the center. To my right here is Balama's mother Jayammal, and her sisters and her daughters. So there's three generations of the family right here. And right behind Dhanama Patti is Balama. She must be about 16 in this photograph right here. And we can go on to actually the most important family heirloom that we have this is Vinay Dhanamal's Veena. As you can see, it's a very, very small Veena and a very small tambura. She was a very small woman, and this is the only Veena that she used in her entire life. The age of this Veena, I think it must be about 150 years or so by now. And this is Vinay Dhanamal's painting in the background. If we look up here, we have a photograph of T. Bala Saraswati and T. Jayammal. So that's Bala Saraswati and Bala Saraswati's mother, Jayammal. Want to zoom in? So coming back to me. So that's just a gist of what what we have here at the Institute and the same place where I live.
Thank you so much. I think that little tour was delightful, and it was better than any presentation that you could have made. So thank you very much.
Yes,
Napinai says that it was a beautiful rendition. She says she had the privilege of seeing Balama perform to Krishna Ni Vegane Bharo. The grace and the technical perfection is well captured by these young performers too. And bravo to you for keeping such a lovely tradition robust.
Thank you so much.
Radhika Nair says very graceful and beautiful lines, and so does Anita Bellari, because everyone liked the softness of their movement and yet, so graceful. So many people have messaged both here and in person to us about how fortunate they've been to attend today's session. Is there a Kalakshetra tradition is an evolution of this Bani? So is there any connect? Can you talk about that?
Kalakshetra is a steadfast institute that represents both the music and dance of South India. But we have to understand the incorporation of Kalakshetra is at a very pivotal time in the history of the dance. It was actually the first time where the dance itself was institutionalized as an education, and you could go and it was open for everybody to go and learn. So that's what Kalakshetra represents today. And there's a lot of hubbub about, people talk about Rukmini Devi and Bala Saraswati. They both represented two very different things and very different ideologies. And at least according to me, there has to be opposing ideologies. And there's room for more than one ideology. And there's more than enough room for artists to be able to respect each other and to value what they do.
That's it.
Yeah.
Mrigank is complimenting the stupendous footwork of the dancers and the grace. Parinita says, Nayana says, excellent performances. And Ajay Hathangadi, complimented you on the little demo that you did. So does Sabira Fernandez is fabulous. Sahitya Sridhar. I mean, the compliments have just poured in. Anita's mesmerized that in just 1 minute you had so many variations of expression. And Sandhya says, so happy to attend the meet today. Malati has a question for you. Are you the only torchbearer of this family tradition?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Are you the only torchbearer of this tradition in your family?
Well, in my family, yes. In my family, unfortunately, 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, there were 15, 16 performers of both the music and dance within the family. But today, for the dance, I represent the dance within my family, and my cousin Girish represents the music in the family. But to come back to that, there's no such thing as a single torchbearer. So everyone who is a part of the parampara is a torchbearer in their own right and sense. You just can't have one individual who can take it forward. The real hiccup for a person like me, to tell you honestly, it's because to have an individual such as Bala Saraswati, who is such an icon, the umbrella of her presence is so strong, even after so many decades. So to say torchbearer, even to me, seems a little awkward sometimes.
But surely you're doing such a fantastic job, and we look up to you for being the light for that. Meeta says, fascinating and delightful. And Rigang, thank you for making this art accessible and easy to understand for others, even like us who have not any exposure to the art. Kala Devi says, it was a privilege to be a part of this. And Lakshmi says, very grateful to be at this session. Ramesh Naidu says, Guruji, thank you for you and your students. And Anita says, thank you again for embracing the tradition with such love and taking on that responsibility to spread and share with the parampara with everyone.
Yes.
Meeta has a question. She says, I'm fascinated by the language and meaning that you showed, and how can we find out more about this?
Language in the sense, yes.
Yeah, exactly what you performed.
Yes. So obviously the dance itself is its own language. That's how the dancer needs to be trained, particularly in the Abhinaya aspect of it. When the dancer is trained from a young age, we only work on the technique, right? It's like learning your alphabets. You need to know your ABCs, and then you need to know how to write it in cursive, and then you need to know how to make words. And then the eloquency of the art can come naturally. So even this Abhinaya that we did today, it's called Mano Dharma. So when you talk about the Manas and Dharma, so what's inside of you, there's a certain innate understanding of how to express. So anything that we perform is not set in the Abhinaya in particular, right? So when we dance a piece, I don't know what I'm going to dance for that particular day. It's done on the fly. But to get to that level, the kids need to be able to have their foundation very, very, very strong. So that is the language of the dance itself. I hope I am answering the question correctly, if I understood it.
You are. Actually, Mrigank has a related question. He says, how important is it for the dancer to understand the language of the composition? And how would a Western student of yours adapt to that?
Very interesting question. The practicality and the reality of it today is that, well, first of all, most of these pieces are either in Tamil or in Telugu, and in Telugu was the language of the court from the 1500s onwards, and many of the pieces are still in Telugu and in Tamil, and of course they're in a more of an archaic version of the languages. But the students are, at least on my side, are encouraged to learn these languages, to be able to at least read and engage with the pieces, where they, to dance to a translation can be really, it can get lost in translation, let's put it that way. So there has to be a real understanding of the language of where this comes from, even if it's Sanskrit or Telugu or Tamil. My grandmother was fluent in all the classical languages of Tamil, Telugu, and Sanskrit, because you really need to know and to be able to read classical texts that end up being inspirations and references to what the art form is. So if you don't have these resources such as language and understanding, it limits you in your growth as a dancer or as a musician. And for a Westerner, pieces are translated word to word, but they have to begin to understand the enunciation of the words and the placement. So the ear needs to really begin to be familiar with the syntax of both, whether it's Tamil or Telugu or Sanskrit or any language. And with that reference, you have to work with translations of pieces. And to teach a Westerner, that's just the top superficial layer we're talking about in trying to teach somebody from a very different cultural viewpoint, right? So my grandmother's students who, yes, then they are, a lot of them are Americans, and they are torchbearers of this tradition. But they would even talk about, even if we're talking about Krishna and the gopis, for example, and the gopis walking down the lane carrying either pots of water or pots of butter on their head or on their hip, which is a cultural phenomenon that does not exist in the West, right? Why the hell would you want to, when you're not going to be placing a pot on your head? But these basic things that we take for granted culturally, they need to be really explained to a Western audience or Western students. And whether it's the pantheon of gods or it's the philosophy behind the religion or the ideas, you know, there are particular aesthetic ideas that we use, right? The monsoon rains. In the monsoon rains, the dancing peacocks in the rain, the image of the lotus, the image of the moon, of the sun, of you know, things that in nature that we have uniquely here within our in our landscape. So it's all these things need to be explained and taught to a Western student, and it's a very, very diligent process that needs to be nuanced to the utmost level each time.
I can imagine how tough it is. Even within different cultures, it would be so tough.
Well, actually, the difficulty is even here now in the 21st century with children here in India, because none of them are exposed to any of this. It's easier to teach an American than it is to teach kids here sometimes about, because we're all wrapped up in our own foggy minds about what our culture is about. And when you have that, that's just another extra layer to be tearing off when you're teaching.
Yes, I think Vandana has a related comment. She says, when you shared the stories about how strict Bala Saraswati's teacher was with her, it makes her wonder how difficult it must be in today's age to teach students, because they have so many distractions and, you know, they're sort of mollycoddled, I guess, by the parents.
Oh, yes, it can be a real, it's difficult for today's kids because, as you said, there are a lot of distractions. And the major issue that I find in teaching today's kids is the easy accessibility to information. There was no needing to go to a library or trying to find a book and trying to read something. You know, the irony of easy access to information is no one uses it to learn it. So it's a great challenge for today's kids. Yes, too many distractions, needing to get something very quick, right? Even for parents. Sometimes they'll come up and say, you know, well, it'll be, when's my daughter or son going to have his or her debut? And I'm like, wait, maybe in another 10 years, if possible. Let's see.
So a couple of other questions. Apparently there is a documentary. I mean, would you have a link to the Satyajit Ray documentary on T. Bala Saraswati? Is that something that is still available? Are you?
That's actually on YouTube. You can get the entire documentary on YouTube.
Okay. A lot of other compliments as well, and I'm not going through each of them.
Yeah.
Kala has a question. When can we see, when can we have the opportunity to see a performance of you and your team in India?
Where is Kala located?
Kala is right now located in Bombay, I think, but moving shortly. But anywhere in India, I guess many of us would like to even travel if.
I want to get out of Madras, so I'm coming to Bombay to perform, by the way.
Oh, that's wonderful. Please tell us. And
yes, we'll make an effort for it and do something. That's definitely possible.
Namaskaram, and thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
That's amazing. I think if there are no more questions, I think that's it. I think I'm still mesmerized by the dance and by the little walkthrough, as is everyone else. And I think everyone's deciding to look up the documentary and so on. I do have. If you have any links to share about the performance, you can add them in the chat. Okay. I'm going to share a link to a couple of things that I'm going to tell everyone about. One is that there is a book by your father as well, yes. Isn't it? Art and Life, Bala Saraswati, her Art and Life by Douglas Knight. That's an excellent book for further reading about the family and the art for those who would like to read more about her. So,
it's actually an astounding book. I'm not saying it because my father wrote it. Who I should really mention is he has been a mridangist for the past 50 years. My father is he represents actually the Kanchipuram style of playing the mridanga, which no one else plays anymore in India. So he's the only person to ever have learned how to play four dance from the lineage from Kanchipuram. And my father has dedicated his entire life towards this art and this family. And I'm very fortunate to have him as my support in doing all of this. So I'm just going to show you guys the copy of the book that's out. Bala Saraswati, Her Art and Life by Douglas M. Knight Jr.
So Daddy's watching.
Oh, Daddy, if you're watching.
Yeah, I think he's watching, and I think he's so proud of you, as he very much should be. Thank you. And I'm going to be sharing a link to YouTube for Khaki. This talk, along with all the others, will all be posted, at this channel. So do subscribe to this channel. And if you missed this talk today, you can get it another day, and you can catch some of the earlier talks as well. So again, thank you so much, Aniruddha. I think that was a delightful, most delightful way to spend my Saturday evening. And I think I say that for many, many other people. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you in Bombay soon.
Yes, see you very soon, for sure.
Very soon.
Thank you.